We will now join Matt Larsen-Daw from WWF to learn how schools play a key role in saving the planet through equipping and inspiring young people to shape a sustainable future for society, and through projects and practices that contribute to addressing climate change and restoring nature. In this session, we'll be introduced to the principles behind a whole school approach to sustainability and gain some key tools and guidance to get started.
Hello everyone, thank you so much. What a lovely introduction. I think that's the nicest introduction for my webinar I've ever had, so thank you so much. I'm just going to share my screen and I'll get started. Great, so it's a real pleasure to be here. Thanks so much to the Transform Our World team for inviting me and WWF to be a part of this. We've got a few things over the course of the week, including quite a few sessions aimed at students, but this one that I'm delivering today is aimed at teachers, it's aimed at educators. And what I'm hoping to do over the course of the next hour, leaving hopefully time for questions at the end, is to really leave you with a sense of your power as educators, your power to make a difference and to inspire change. So for those of you who may not know, WWF, the Worldwide Fund for Nature, is the world's leading independent conservation organisation. And our mission is to create a world where people and wildlife can thrive together. And I'm the education manager, which means that while my colleagues are working on the science and the conservation projects around the world, my job is to try and ensure that our work and the science behind it is understood by the next generation and by the wider public, but also, and this is really important to my talk today, that the power that lies in education and in the education sector and in schools and in students and in teachers is harnessed to bring about the change that we so desperately need to happen in society over the coming years. So I'm not going to talk too much about the issues, although they will come up from time to time. I will try and leave you with as many practical tools as possible in terms of how you can actually cover some of these issues in the classroom, and also how you can bring about some of the other changes through your school activities that I'll talk about as we go through. But I did want to start with just a little bit of context, just to set us in the right mind frame, because I've talked about, the title of the talk is Education for a Sustainable Planet. So I think we need to start kind of by defining our terms. In what way are we not currently a sustainable planet, or how are we not currently living in a sustainable way, and what does that mean for education? So before I really start my talk proper, I'd like to hand over to Sir David Attenborough, not live, don't get too excited, to give a little bit of a context to the situation we find ourselves in.
Hello, I'm David Attenborough. Our planet needs your help. Human beings are changing every part of this amazing planet. These changes are so great that scientists are saying that we have entered a new age, the Anthropocene epoch, the age of humans. This means that our actions are shaping the future of our planet for better or worse. At present, we are using up the Earth's resources faster than our planet can replenish them. This is now a threat to us and to the amazing creatures we share our home with. The future of our planet is in our hands. We must understand how the natural wonders we depend on for our survival can be sustained forever. Explore the natural treasures on your doorstep and discover what you can do to help restore and protect wildlife all around the world. Connect with other young people, find strength in numbers, and unite to protect your future. Together, you can save our planet.
Thank you, David. So David there talking about some of the really key issues. That video is part of the Our Planet education program, which I developed in my previous role at WWF. And there is a lot of content there that you can use in the classroom, just as an aside, including that video as an inspiration piece for your students. So to come back to the key terms, I've already used the term sustainability a lot of times, and I suspect you do as well. And when a term is used a lot, there is always a danger that its real meaning starts to kind of get forgotten. It becomes shorthand for a whole range of different things. And I think already companies, the way that companies use the word sustainability, it's often shorthand for environmentally friendly or more environmentally friendly. And I think it's really important that we do come back to the true meaning of the term and do that with our students as well when we're talking about these issues. So sustainability, as I'm sure you know if you stop and think about it, means living in a way where you could continue to live in the same way forever. You'd never run out of anything. You'd never destroy the basis for that way of life. So sustainability means that what we do, we must be able to do forever. And this is a really important concept because you can apply it to anything. You do not have to learn each individual issue and the cause of that issue, and therefore think about what the solution could be in order to just think about what is good, what is bad. You can just learn the principle of sustainability and apply that to anything and make your own mind up over whether it's a sensible thing to do and what the problems with something might be. So sustainability is a really core concept, and I'm going to keep on coming back to that, which is why I really wanted to address that. It means, in effect, that nothing about the way that we might live is inherently good or bad. The important thing is the total sort of balance of the way that we live on this planet. It needs to be sustainable. It needs to be a way of life that could continue forever. Now, many of you might talk about the Sustainable Development Goals in your classroom. Often called the UN Global Goals. Now, at WWF, we talk about these a lot. The Scouts talk about them a lot. It's a really important way of thinking about sustainable development. And a lot of what I talk about today will fit into the broad category of education for sustainable development. So I wanted to mention the Sustainable Development Goals. I wanted to show them to you in a slightly different light to how you might be used to seeing them. So what you'll probably be familiar with is the grid, where each goal has its own little square and you see all 17 together. Well, this is the way that we like to talk about them at WWF, and particularly when we're talking about the importance of environmental education. So we call this the wedding cake of the Sustainable Development Goals. And all of the Sustainable Development Goals are incredibly important. We know that. So they're the 17 goals, or the 16 goals, and then 17 being working together to achieve them. That are the kind of hallmarks of success. If we keep on developing as a society, if we move forward, don't stay where we are, but actually achieve more and more so that we have better lives as humans. And it's really important that we do that in a way that makes things better, not just for now, but also for the future, that it's sustainable in the sense that we could carry on living in this better way forever. It also means that sustainability for the planet has to be for everyone on it. It can't be that some people benefit at the expense of others. That has not brought everyone up. That's not a sustainable development in that sense. So education for sustainable development is about all these aspects of development progress. It's about preparing young people for a future and helping them to equip themselves to be able to help achieve this future where everything is better for everyone. But however, we are mainly talking about the environmental objectives. And that's not just because WWF is an organization focused on the environment, and it's not just because this is a climate summit. It's because actually these environmental goals, what we call the ones to do with the biosphere, so life on land, life in water, clean fresh water, and also climate, of course, being the key one, they are the bottom layer of this wedding cake, because if we don't have those in place, if we haven't achieved stability on our planet, all the other things that we want to achieve for society and for all the humans that are alive today and in the future aren't going to be possible. It's all very well saying that we want to eliminate poverty, that we want education, that we want social justice, and so on. If we are struggling to even survive because we have destroyed the planet we depend on for survival, those aren't going to ever be priorities. So that's why we think it's fair to say, if we're talking about education and sustainability, the fact that we're going to really be focusing on the environment is justified for that reason, if you like. And so what we don't want to lose sight of is the fact that all of those sustainable development goals are connected. And in the same way, all of the causes of the crisis that we find ourselves in now and the issues that we face are also all connected. So one of the things that I also want to talk about, and I will then apply it to what it means for us in the classroom and beyond the classroom as educators, is systems thinking. And so that can be a daunting term, but really what it means is that we need to understand the connections. We need to understand how all of the different things that we talk about when we're talking about climate change, when we're talking about other environmental issues, we need to understand how they're connected, and we need to understand how their causes are connected and the solutions are connected. So I'm going to spend a couple of slides just talking a little bit about what I mean by systems thinking, because again, that might not be something that we have had to engage with as educators. It might not be something that you talk about with your students in the classroom. And one of the things that I'd like you to take away at the end of this talk is just how important it is that we always do think about how we can ensure that whatever we're teaching and whatever we're doing, we're applying a little bit of a systems thinking approach. So do excuse me if this is all teaching grandmother to suck eggs in the next couple of slides. So what is a system? What do we mean by a system? There can be living systems, there can be man-made systems, there can be mechanical systems, and so on. In essence, what it means is there are parts and they are joined together in achieving a function, and that makes a system. And that doesn't mean that any collection of things is a system. If you have a pile of books, but they're all about different things and they're just sort of randomly in a heap, then that is a heap rather than a system. It has parts, but it doesn't have a function that all of those different parts contribute to, unless you're a cat, because of course cats will always find a function for a pile of books, especially if they're the ones that you need for a webinar. So in the same way, and I'm going to bring in school at this point, so if you have a big building, lots of rooms, in a great place in the community, it's still in effect just a building until you add some other parts. You add a teacher, a teaching staff, and then you add students that will come through and get their education, and then you apply the function of these parts as bringing an education to those students. Then it stops being a heap and it starts being something that is a system, a school. And then you get a cat that has achieved not just somewhere to sleep, but an education. So some systems are made up of parts that themselves can have other functions. So in this case, that building, it could be used for other things instead or as well. The teaching staff take part in lots of other things outside school that make them parts of other systems. The human body of all of those students and teachers are themselves living systems. So it can get quite complicated, but it's just about thinking, how do you define a system when you're talking about a particular selection of things and their function. But in some cases, a system may only work if all of its parts are present. And not only that, those parts, if any other part is missing or if they're separated from the system, have no other function in their own right. So these are systems that really depend on all of the parts working together. And that's the kind of thing that you'll find, for example, within a living system, because all of the different parts have evolved together and they are how they are because of everything else that's within the system. Take them out of that system, they can't survive, and possibly the system can't survive either. So the analogy that is often used for this is a bicycle. The different parts of the bicycle on their own are pretty useless, but put them all together in the right way. Those connections between the parts create the function and allow it to be a useful form of transport for a velociraptor in this case. So I mentioned before that I previously developed an education program for the Netflix series Our Planet, which was created by WWF. I want to mention that again, simply because the Our Planet series, which is still available not only on Netflix, but free on YouTube at the moment, is actually a really good source of content if you want to cover this concept in the classroom. Each episode and a whole set of short videos that are perfect for the classroom on the website, which is there under the title on this slide, deal with a different biome of the planet, and then overall the series shows how they are connected, all performing different functions and creating one living system, which is the planet. So to sort of refer back to the first slide when I was talking about sustainability and that view of Earth from space, this finite blue marble floating in space where we have only as much resources as is currently on the planet. There's no help coming from anywhere else. It's really important to note that it works like a living system, and therefore when you are talking about one issue, when you are talking about one part of the bicycle, if you like, of this living system, you do have to understand not only how it works and what threats it faces, and what the causes of those threats might be. You need to think about what part it plays in that system, and therefore what other issues might be connected to it. So since I've just mentioned, well, I've talked about bicycles quite a lot, I wanted to bring in something else that really shows how we can apply this thinking to our work as educators when it comes to climate change. So some of you may have already heard of the bicycle model of teaching climate change. So for those of you who haven't, there are places that you can find this online, including our course, Education for a Sustainable Planet, which I'll mention again at the end. But just very briefly to go through the thinking around it, this will really chime, I think, with some of the things that you've been thinking about today, or possibly in the lead up to this summit, and a lot of the things that you and your students will be prompted to think about over the rest of the week. So what it comes down to is the fact that if we're talking about climate change, which is this huge, all-encompassing issue that affects every, or could affect every part of our life, and can be considered an existential threat, we can just pick out little details and start to talk about them, but that won't be a particularly helpful way. And in fact, it could be destructive, because if we don't teach climate change in the right way, we could cause anxiety in our students, we could cause worry and a sense of urgency, but then without giving them the tools to be able to do anything about it, to think constructively about it, to learn from it, and to apply themselves to being part of the solution. And likewise, understanding it, you can actually increase anxiety simply by showing the magnitude of the scale of the problem, but then not really being able to communicate the full causes and solutions and all of the different interdependencies within it, because that leaves people feeling helpless if they feel unable to actually talk about climate change with confidence and to actually apply thinking to it to start to be parts of the solution. So this bicycle model takes that systems approach that I mentioned, this idea that you need all the parts to create something that has that does the real important function, in this case, climate change education. And so you could have a whole webinar just on this, but to run through it very quickly, and the labels are on the screen as well. The wheels are described as being the knowledge and the skills to apply that knowledge. So that's really the core, I guess, of what we consider to be our role as educators, bringing that knowledge and the skills to apply that knowledge to students. But we can't leave it at that. If it is, they'll be directionless, they'll roll around, they might end up flat on the floor. So knowledge is not just about the issues. The frame is needed, and that's understanding the frame that the learner is coming from. because that's going to be what holds those wheels, those knowledge, pieces of knowledge and the thinking skills that they're going to gain from you. And that's their identity, their values, their worldview. All of those things will mean that they come at that information and those skills from a different perspective, and they'll apply them in a different way. And that has to be understood in the way that you teach it in the classroom, and you're thinking about how to frame those issues themselves. Then there's the pedals. The pedals are action. So it's connected to that knowledge. It's about applying the knowledge, but it's about applying it in a way that's actually got real world impact. And it requires effort. So you really need to work to drive this model forward. It's not just about presenting it. You need to sort of help students to overcome the barriers that they might feel themselves to understanding and engaging with such a scary topic. Then there's the saddle, which is kind of just making sure it's comfortable. It's motivation and it's participation. It needs to be possible and attract students to take part. So it's not just about again just bringing this vital information, putting it in a curriculum context. You need to sort of invite it, because you have to be so active in engaging with this issue and understanding it and actually applying it in a constructive way. You need to make that experience something which draws the student in and makes it possible for them to understand. The breaks are in there. They're the operational barriers. So just thinking through what the barriers are. It could be lack of money or a transport network, taking positive action around sustainable travel, all of these things which actually students need to understand. Like, if we understand what the problems are and we understand the issues, why are things not already fixed? And so it's actually really key to understand that these breaks exist, and actually it's something we have to work on. And then the handlebars there is future orientation as well. But the one that I really want to have in mind as we go forward with this presentation is the lamp. And the lamp is hope and the emotional response students will have to climate change. And that's really, really important. Hope needs to be nurtured, because otherwise there just is no incentive to use those pedals of action and to drive forward. You need to believe that there is a path ahead. You need to be able to see a path ahead. And that's a really, really important part of what I'll talk about as we go forward. But also, I think this summit is a really good example of how there are ways to ensure that students feel that there is something to hope for, something to use to focus on the future. So I'm going to come back to this idea of hope time and time again. But I think as educators, we just need to bear it in mind with every single lesson that we might plan, every single activity that we might prepare for in school that is to do with climate change and the climate crisis. So we know that education provides opportunities to prepare the young people for the future. That's the point of education. With climate change education and all education in the context of climate change, we need to think about what that actually means. And so for me, what it means is that students need to have the tools required to be able to play a role in shaping a positive future, which in this case means dealing with climate change. But they also need to be aware of and to feel like they have the skills to be able to have a positive life in its own right. And that's partially being prepared for what the future is going to throw at us. Because otherwise, if you were prepared for the future, for the present, there could be whole sectors that are no longer around in the future. You might prepare entirely for the wrong career. There could be activities and lifestyle choices that are simply not possible in the future. And again, these things could be real blows to someone who hasn't prepared for that. But you can prepare positively by fully understanding what the issues around climate change actually are, and therefore how things are going to have to change, so that you can be equipped to thrive within that future. The other takeaway really from this whole kind of discussion of systems change, systems thinking, is that it can be very tempting to jump onto narratives, stories. So I wanted to mention plastics. I don't know how much it's going to come up over the course of this summit, but We know from experience of engaging with this age group, primary and secondary, and with schools, that plastics has become a really useful topic, I guess, for discussing environmental issues and thinking about possible solutions and the role that individuals can play in those solutions. But there's a real danger with that, because there's a very, very simple cause effect kind of linear model with the plastic story. We see some footage of plastic in the ocean being choking a turtle or ending up in the stomach of a whale. We see the plastic that's coming into our own lives in supermarkets or just at home, and we think, right, there's cause and effect here, and if we can just stop plastic at this point, it'll stop getting to that point. And that's kind of a really nice, easy story to get to grips with. And therefore, it's quite easy to rally around, it's quite easy to take action around. But the problem with that is that it's in a little bubble. It doesn't recognize the wider system that it is, and it doesn't recognize that there are values at play, sustainable values that are being not applied in the case of single-use plastic, and that we need to understand and apply in all aspects of life. And if we just think of the causes of an issue being the very physical thing that we can see, and we try and get rid of that, like banning earbuds or banning straws, we might end up not actually dealing with the issue, or even if we do deal with the issue, we don't deal with a wider problem that was just a symptom of. Whereas if we apply systems thinking, we can see that actually there's no penalization of companies that create this plastic waste by packaging things in something that can't be recycled, can't be reused, and it just has to go out into landfill. They can still turn a profit, even though they're actually undermining everyone's resources by damaging the natural world. There's people wanting single-use things because it's easy and quicker in the moment, and not thinking that just for a little bit of effort they could do something else and not cause any plastic waste and so on. And those kinds of sustainable values, that kind of thinking process, rather than just a set of rules, things to avoid, things to do, is actually how we want our next generation to be applying these skills and this thinking. And so I don't mean to bring up plastics as if it's not an important issue. It obviously is an important issue, and actually it can be a useful analogy or a useful example of unsustainable action, but only really if it's then applied across and shown within this wider system, so that we can actually take something away that has more value. And I think talking about sustainability being shorthand for everything, it is unsustainable to be generating single plastic that goes into the ecosystem, but it isn't actually anything directly to do with climate change. There are some convoluted ways that you can connect plastic production and even plastic damaging ecosystems round about the climate change, but it's not a direct driver. And addressing all the plastic in the world won't in any way slow down or stop the climate crisis. And yet it's often the action that schools are taking when they're thinking about the climate crisis. So that's a sort of disconnect that I think shows a lack of systems thinking. In a sense, I guess we all love narratives. We all love there to be a dragon to slay. It's kind of human nature, and plastics, we can kind of see the boundaries of it. We can kind of put it up there as a monster that we can see and we can slay. So I mentioned before, there are these two driving aspects to what we need to think about when we're introducing students to the climate crisis and to biodiversity loss issues. And that is that we need them to be able to drive a sustainable future, because they are going to be the ones making the decisions, keeping to the lifestyle changes and so on that are going to be required for this change to take effect. But we also, as educators, have a duty to help them to thrive in that future. And the other takeaway from that conversation about sustainability is that this isn't just about the way we live. This isn't about just thinking, right, that's causing a problem, we need to stop doing it. That's good, let's start doing that more. It's about the way we think. It's about being able to take this idea of sustainability and apply it to whatever might come up that has not been anticipated, particularly important for us to think about as teachers, because all educators are effectively time travelers. We're effectively Doctor Who in a classroom, because we have to think the effects of what we do today in the classroom are not going to really be impacting the world from a teaching perspective. They're not going to really be impacting the world until a few years' time, when those students start to apply what they've learned and start to be decision makers and employees and so on out there in the real world. And likewise, we also need to think about, if that's in a few years' time, how is the world going to be different from how it is now? Because we need those students to be prepared for that world, not the world as it is right now. And so these kind of thinking processes and these values and these concepts are much more important than a set of information that will have changed. The science will have moved on. The situation will have developed in a few years' time. So that's all about education. And I know I've just kind of talked very broadly about some key thought processes that we should have as educators, rather than kind of diving into some real tools and techniques there. So I apologize for that, but I will signpost some next steps for your reading and for resources that you can use in the classroom at the end of this. But I want to move away from the classroom now, and I want to talk about what we mean by a whole school approach, and how schools can have impact outside of just the way that students are prepared for the future. So I've got a little diagram here, which you may have seen if you're familiar with WWF's work. We bring out something called the Living Planet Report every 2 years, and it talks about the state of nature. It talks about how healthy the planet is in terms of wildlife and wild places. And in the last one, not the new one that was just brought out a few weeks ago, but in 2018, we had this diagram on the left here. All of those sort of dark green and blue fogs were there, and it was talking about individual action being important, because even though what you do seems really small, it can lead to whole communities acting, and business being influenced, and governments being influenced, and they can make the really big changes that are needed. And schools play a vitally important role in this machine, in this kind of this system of bringing about social change. And that's because a school is operating. It has hundreds of students coming through. It has teaching staff. It has businesses providing services and being paid by the school. There's a payroll for teachers. That means pension schemes, savings, all of these different things that mean that schools operate at scale in society. They also have great visibility, because so many families interact with the school. They tend to have big sites. They're often used for community events. So they have this very, very powerful role within a community and within society as a whole. And that means that through education and through the things that you can do in the school with the school community, they can be a real driver of those individual actions. But most importantly, they can connect those individual actions into community action, because a school is a community. And if the whole school community comes together around a cause, it can be so powerful. And it can go beyond that. It can go beyond the students and the staff, to the families, to those businesses, to the wider community, to local decision makers, and so on. So don't underestimate the power that you have as educators and as a school to actually bring about real change. It's not just about thinking about putting the foundations in place so that your students can make real change in the future. As a school community, you can make real change now. And to just think about a few of the different ways that you can do that. Think about the way a school is. So there's that picture in the middle, that system that we talked about. The school's doing its main function, and its main function is students coming through, getting their education, going out into the world. But they don't just go out into the world, they're going back to their families, they're talking to their families. Their families are learning from what they learn at school, seeing what they do, and witnessing the decisions that they make as a result of that. And of course, they go on and they become employees and so on. So there's all of this stuff on the right, which is the impact of those knowledge, values, behaviors, and actions that you bring to your students. But then the school itself has its own footprint. It's a big business. It has a big, well, some schools have lovely green grounds. Not all schools, unfortunately, of course, but those that do have a real biodiversity impact, for better or worse, depending on how they manage that site. So there's a whole load of decisions that can be made there that can make a difference to the local area's biodiversity. They have these employees and suppliers. That means they influence businesses. And of course, students can be part of making decisions around what procurement policies you have and so on. What values are you going to put into place that guide the way that your school has impact through the money that it spends? So you've got biodiversity, you've got carbon, water, and energy, all of the different things that any running business with a premises has to factor. And then you have this impact, this ripple effect of impact from the students, the local community, through society, and of course, on the planet as a whole. So we call this a whole school approach to education for sustainable development. So this is thinking not just about that function of the school system of education, but about this whole system that's in place that allows you to have direct impact as well outside the classroom and beyond. And what it means in practice is thinking about how you can embed those sustainable values in the culture of the school, in the curriculum, of course, in the campus, the way that it is run and the way that it's used, and in the community as a whole. And if you can think about all four of those areas, you'll realize just how powerful a school can be as an agent for change. So we have a set of kind of first steps that you can take to start embedding a whole school approach, and I'll talk a little bit more about it. But there's a full course that you can take, which should only take you about 5 hours. You do it in 1 hour modules, then it's free, which is called Education for Sustainable Development. It's on the Microsoft Education Center, and the link will come up later on before I stop for questions. But there are a set of small steps that you can take, and they are quite achievable. And so the first one is just take small steps. Don't wait until you've got everything in place that you feel that you can suddenly make this big splash. Just start moving in the right direction, and you will start to have an impact. And it will become easier and easier to take the next step. And the second step is to formalize it. So when you've started to do it, people start to become aware of it. People start to see the value. And you can get it formalized in school policy, or even just by it being a sort of public thing that the whole school community is aware of. Then start to engage people. It becomes really possible at that stage. People can be engaged formally and informally. Develop a curriculum, so try and build it into that part of the school's delivery. Develop external relationships, so think beyond the school, think about those businesses, think about local decision makers. Devise a strategy. When you've got this kind of the basics in place, you can start to think about where you can have the most impact, and therefore you can create a strategy around that and start working towards big change. So I just wanted to run through, I've got a few more things to say, but just to kind of recap on everything so far, there's a few key things that we can do as teachers that I think will make a huge difference to the impact that we have day to day. So the first one is teach the connection. So think about whatever information, whatever subject you're bringing in, how can you make sure that it's seen within the context of all the other things that it's connected to, whether it's biology, science, or something to do with with society, economics, everything. The second is foster sustainable values. So through what the school does, whether it's the way that people are encouraged to use water, or to turn off lights, or where the food comes from, just make sure that through the school experience, students can see what sustainability looks like in practice. Nurture a connection to nature. Students spend a lot of their time at school, and it's a real equalizer in that respect, because those students might have very different home lives. Some will be encouraged to go out all the time with their parents, or they'll go out on walks at the weekends and so on. Others won't, and they might not actually have the opportunities to really experience nature, because these days, obviously, for health and safety reasons, quite valid health and safety reasons, it's not possible to do what many of us would have done when we were younger and just, go out the door age 10 and just go out exploring on our own. And so this can lead to just a lack of knowledge, and therefore a lack of interest in nature. And we know, and you'll know as educators, you don't need to teach a connection to nature. You just need to give the opportunity for students to discover it. Nature is so immersive, it's so fascinating, it's so much detail. Every time you look closer, you see more. Like, just given the opportunity to do that, students, children will discover the wonder of nature. And normally a lack of interest in nature is not a considered decision, or just something which students have decided is it's not for them. It's because actually they just never had those experiences at the stage when they were forming their interests. The fourth is support and empower, and you're already doing this by taking part in this this summit. Just thinking of ways that students can be helped discover ways to act and things to do, and then being supported to do that, and being given, I guess, permission to do those things, making it seem and feel appropriate for them to be taking action, not a silly little project by some young people, and isn't it cute, but actually, yes, no, go for it, you should, and your voice is valid. That's really important, and that coming not only through projects that you run and opportunities that you give, but just through the way you talk about these things with your students. You are, a mentor figure alongside parents, but with less of the baggage. And so your encouragement can really make a huge difference to what students might do now, but also what they might feel they're allowed to do in the future. And lastly, lead the way. You can show what's possible by doing it yourself, and drive hope by showing that beacon going forward and thinking about what's actually possible, and reminding them at all stages that actually there is a positive future if we work for it. And with that in mind, I'm just going to talk about a few little resources. I'm also going to apply some of what we've said to the oceans theme. It's oceans and fresh water today, I realized. So I wanted to kind of talk about something related to the marine ecosystem, to try and bring some of this to life. Before I do, I'll just mention this again at the end, but we're currently running, WWF are currently running a challenge for students called the Future Visions Challenge. And I will show you the link at the end, but it's based around a short film that was created alongside Our Planet, but we've only just released it. It's about 4 minutes long, and it's computer generated over real footage. So real footage within CGI. You won't be able to tell what's CGI and what isn't. As you can probably gather from this picture, a lot of that is CGI. And what it shows is the future that is possible, or a future that is possible. If we were to solve the problems that we currently face, if we were to solve the climate crisis, what could the future look like? And what's really important to get across to students is that it's not just about the world we live in now with the stuff that we actually shouldn't do because it's bad for the planet taken out. It's not a limited experience of the world. It's not a compromise. It's actually taking these sustainable values and building the future with those values. And that can mean a future that is better, that's more futuristic, but we're healthier, we're happier, we can live confidently, we can concentrate on having fantastic lives and achieving amazing things rather than surviving and dealing with problems that we've created for ourselves. It's a really positive and beautiful thing. And if students can be encouraged to dream about what's possible in the future, rather than only think about the dangers of us not dealing with these problems in time, then they're going to be much more likely to be constructively approaching their career choices and their lifestyle choices, and just thinking about their path into that future in a way that's going to be much more helpful, much more positive, and much healthier for them when they're thinking about how they can actually play a role in shaping that future. And there are lots of different ways that you can do this. Do take part in our challenge. What we're asking is for students to just reflect on what such a future would feel like and what it would mean for them, what it could look like, and then to create something, a video, a speech, an artwork, a short story, a poem. It really doesn't matter, whatever they like. And we've already got some poems written by Benjamin Zephaniah and Kay Tempest, and a song by SOS for the Children, from the Children, sorry. Just to kind of like show the kinds of different ways you can interpret that challenge. And it's a really lovely, positive way to think about some of these issues. But another way that you can do it is by just bringing in positive case studies. We're often focused on the science of the problems, what we call in WWF campaigning terms, the Jeopardy message. And actually, it's really important to actually say, well, it's not just about like, this is a problem because it's unsustainable, the way we're living is unsustainable, we need to try and stop doing that, we need to try and slow down this disaster. We can just show examples of how this is already being applied. It's not actually that complicated when it comes to actually applying them positively. So as I said, I wanted to bring in something from the marine subject. So this is Bren Smith, and he's a cod fisherman originally, and he was fishing off Newfoundland when the cod stocks crashed. And those of you that know your history, or perhaps have seen David Attenborough's new biography where he mentions the background to this, it was a classic example of just the way that we have not applied sustainable values as a species, as a society, because the cod stocks crashed because they were being overfished. So you'd think the obvious solution would be to stop overfishing, to rethink the way that we manage that ocean. But it wasn't. What happened was this industry that had only sprung up over a few years, really, it had obviously become very profitable, but it had lots of employees and lots of people working in that industry. And so the American government, rather than find a way for this to be rethought and to be taken forward in a different way, started subsidizing the industry because it wasn't catching as much fish, because it was going out and basically fishing in a way that destroyed the fish populations. They said, well, we'll need to subsidize it then so that they can carry on. And that's obviously like just crazy when you think about it. Bren Smith took a different route. He thought, there's no way that we can carry on in this way. Like, even if it was subsidized for a few years, I mean, it's unsatisfying. He wasn't enjoying it because, you know, he loves the ocean. He's out there on his boat. He wouldn't want to be doing anything else. And he could see that he was destroying the ecosystem. So he came up with an alternative way to live that lifestyle, to get out on his boat and to make his living, but in a way that didn't just not cause problems, but was actually bringing benefits to him, but also to the ocean. So he invented something called 3D ocean farming. And the way it works is you put the kind of scaffold of ropes across the surface of the water and you grow kelp off it. So it hangs down. So you create a kelp forest, but a kelp forest that you have, you know, a little bit of management control over. So you can harvest the kelp just by pulling up the ropes, as he was doing in that last photo. Then you can also grow harvests of shellfish, scallops, oysters, mussels, and so on. And they thrive in this environment. And then, of course, this kelp forest attracts loads of fish and acts as a nursery and protects small fish from predators in the same way that a kelp forest does or a coral reef does. And so you end up hugely improving biodiversity, while also drawing out carbon through all of the shellfish and pollutants, because as some of you will know, mussels do an amazing job of filtering the ocean water, because biodiversity effectively is what keeps an ocean healthy, as it does any other ecosystem, and you've increased it. And meanwhile, you're able to make a living at the same time without putting anything in, no fertilizers, no pesticides, and not taking anything out that isn't replaced. And so these kinds of examples, like, you might not think of that off the top of your head. He was in that context. He could kind of imagine it working, and he tried it out, and it did. But you bring these kinds of examples to students, and it can really inspire with like this idea of just thinking outside the box, not just thinking about like, well, here's how it is now, we need to take this bit away because it's a problem, but actually starting from scratch and creating a solution. So I mentioned before, this is kind of a very summarized selection of takeaways from a longer course that you can do. It's free. It's called Education for a Sustainable Planet, and it's on the Microsoft Education Center. If you do go to it, if you're inspired by this talk to give it a try, you'll see it's a learning path, which means that it's made up of 5 courses. So they're kind of like modules in one course, really, but you can just do one if you can see that there's one that really just answers everything that you want. If you do take this course, you get a Microsoft CPD badge, so a teacher's kind of accreditation badge for completing each of the courses. But if you complete all 5, as well as getting a learning pathway badge from Microsoft, you can also get a certificate from WWF to show that you've you've completed this course. So I really do encourage you to do that. These are the courses which kind of follow a similar path to the talk I've done today. And along the way, you can complete a learning journal. And by completing that learning journal, you'll have something to refer back to that's relevant to your job, your level of teaching, because this is appropriate for primary, secondary, and in fact, teachers anywhere in the world. And then also you can submit that learning journal to us to claim your certificate. So please do consider taking some time to do that over the weeks ahead. We have a whole load of resources on our website for teachers and for schools. So please do visit our website after this, www.org.uk, and look at our schools pages. If you sign up to our newsletter, you'll be notified when we're doing live events, live lessons, and also when we have teacher trainings and when we bring out new resources. And we also have a program called Learn to Love Nature, which is loads of resources that are really suitable for online or remote learning. So things that you can just ask students to get on with, or things that you can do over a Zoom call and so on. We've got some really great resources on there. I just only wanted to highlight a few. One which I really encourage any teachers on this call to look at is our Planet's Future Summit workshop, which is a role-playing workshop. You can do it over a whole series of lessons. You can kind of spread it over a term, or you can just about do it in a 2-hour afternoon. And what it means is that students all take on different roles in what is effectively an international summit. And some are world leaders. They have to make the final decisions and they have the budget. Others are all playing expert witness roles, if you like, coming and giving evidence about a particular biome and its importance. So each student or group of students rather researches something in detail and presents as part of the summit, but actually through the summit they learn not only about loads of different subjects and how they're connected, but also the sort of intricacies and the different stakeholders involved in bringing about change at that national and international decision maker level. And we believe that political literacy is really important to build alongside environmental literacy at the moment, because it is a political issue. I also just wanted to highlight it's Outdoor Learning Day last week, and we have a toolkit for local action on biodiversity that includes this wonderful app that some of you may be aware of called Seek by iNaturalist, which basically you just go exploring, you scan anything that you find, anything living, and it will tell you what species it is. It's fantastic for bringing biodiversity naturalist techniques into biology lessons, or doing a BioBlitz and actually thinking about what changes you can make in the local area around your school. David Attenborough, I've already mentioned his new film that's come out. I just wanted to highlight that you can screen that film. It's license free for schools to screen. And there's a workshop template that we've provided for you to use that screening as an opportunity to kickstart an action plan for your school. So getting all of the school community around thinking about what they could do as individuals and what the school community could do. Okay, so I've got some questions that have come in, and I've got nearly 10 minutes to answer a few. I'm going to leave these 5 big steps up on the screen, which has a few useful links, hopefully useful. So just off the back of some of the things I've talked about, these are 5 things that you could go away and start doing. So one would be to go and sign up for that course. Second, I haven't mentioned it because I know you'll hear about it elsewhere, but the Let's Go Zero 2030 campaign is a really brilliant thing that you can do in terms of that whole school approach. It's a school commitment to putting a flag up and saying that it's important, but then also to galvanize the school community around trying to achieve what you can. The David Attenborough Life on Our Planet, you can screen it and run the workshop. You can run a Future Visions challenge with your students, and you can get outside with that local biodiversity and the CCAP. Great. So I've got questions. How long does the course take in total? Is it suitable to do with the group? Yeah, so we actually planned to be running it as a proper course, and we would have delivered it physically. Unfortunately, with the lockdown and with the pandemic, we haven't been able to do that. So we've just left it as this online course. It would be really fantastic to do as a group. There's videos that you can watch together. There's discussion points. We've got them in there as reflection points. And the idea is you fill in your reflection journal. It would be even more valuable if you were with a group of other teachers and you could actually discuss those things and make notes that way. It takes 5 hours in total. I would say 5 hours maximum. I think some of the courses take less than an hour, in fact. And there's 5 of them. So you can rattle through it, or you can spend time doing it in a considered way. But you'll get to the end of it knowing, you know, everything that's there, and you can obviously go back and mug up on some of those details when you need them. Do schools recognise this as a certified course? Yeah, well, certainly Microsoft is recognised. So the qualifications, the accreditation you get is CPD recognised. I don't think our certificate, it would depend on your school. It's more of a sort of CV enhancement and something which I hope schools would look favourably on. But I think CPD hours, you'd have to get a steer from your school as to whether they find the whole course certificate significant. But luckily, having each course individually recognised with a Microsoft badge means that it's got a certain number of CPD hours, one each, associated with it. So we've got so many pressures on teachers. How can I persuade SLT that CPD on climate change is a priority, especially when other CPD topics are compulsory? Yeah, good question. So there is some guidance on this in the course and a couple of case studies. Ultimately, we all face different challenges depending on how receptive our school leadership is these challenges. But I think that it feels to me like the tide is changing. I do think that action on climate change, tackling climate change as a subject, these things have started to feel like there's pressure coming from both students and parents even, but that's really going to differ from school to school. So what I would suggest is that things like the Let's Go Zero campaign are a great way to give some shape to what you're proposing. So Let's Go Zero is one thing that's around carbon, and it's around kind of school action and communication around the need to get to net zero. That alongside, for example, eco schools, which is more about student-led action and work around food and things like that. Those things that have a structure to them sometimes can seem a little bit more palatable to senior leadership. So if you can sort of draw together a few things like that, maybe test the water with one-off events, it's another way, and basically just see how you can kind of tease in like just ways to initiate some activities and some events and some conversations, or sign up to programs that might not do everything, but they do one aspect of it. And then when they are successful, when they are well received, or when they can see the positive outcomes of that, then hopefully it becomes easier and easier. It's kind of an educating upwards thing. You can't persuade them whether they should go and do that course, but you can sort of demonstrate to them some of these things. And in cases of things like cutting carbon and so on, in some cases, a lot of the stuff that you can do or encouraged to do will end up saving money for the school. So there's a kind of business case that you can make as well. And then I've probably got time for one more. Well, very quick one. Is the course available for teachers in other countries? It's available for any teacher, but at the moment it's in English, Finnish, being translated into a couple of other languages. It's currently in progress. But the idea is we end up with it translated into as many languages as possible. So yes, it is intended to be a global course. It is not just UK specific. So if you are able to do it in English, it's suitable for teachers of any country. It's talking about those kind of concepts and the orientation, and there's case studies from all around the world. So it's encouraged for teachers anywhere in the world. And lastly, do you have any top tips for getting sustainability embedded in the curriculum? So top tips, oh gosh. I think choosing a cross-curricular topic that can really capture the imagination of students and staff and sort of make things not just like fun and interesting for the students, but actually easier for the teachers. I think that's a really good way to do it. And so my top subject to be able to do that, and it might seem like it's one step away from climate change, but bear with me, is food. If you can work around the subject of food, it's already a really popular topic at both primary and secondary as a kind of cross-curricular study. You can basically bring all the aspects of everything that I've talked about in terms of that systems thinking and those sustainable values into play. You can apply it in the school, what school catering policy is. You can apply it in science and geography, because these concepts of how food production are driving climate change and biodiversity loss already illustrate the connections, but also connect to all the biomes that you might be studying in geography, all of the science ecosystem subjects that you might be looking at in science and so on. And then you can apply it to real world behaviors, livelihoods, school projects, and so on. So that's just one example. You could obviously choose something different, but food, I think, is a really good example. But it's that principle of taking a topic that you can drive kind of a school conversation around, but also cross-curricular work for teachers, and where there's a huge amount of resources already available. There's loads of school resources on food from Eco Schools, from WWF, and from others. The Soil Association has some really good ones as well. So you can kind of make it quite easy to get a conversation that can then be applied across other subjects. There's some more questions there. I'm not going to have time to answer anymore because I've gone a minute over, so I'm going to have to draw it to a close there. But thank you so much for all those questions and for bearing with me. Rattled through a lot of information in 1 hour. Please do check out the links that I've put up on screen, and do feel free to contact me outside this by LinkedIn or email, and I'd be happy to answer any